Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Friday, the 15th of June 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines to end this week, and what a week it's been, particularly for Brexit in Westminster. And indeed, that's where it ends as well in terms of the political news, because the Tory MPs, or rather the Conservative Party, have got a new revolt over Brexit, particularly between the government, Prime Minister Theresa May, and those MPs who are very much on the softer side of Brexit, or very much are for a meaningful vote, or Parliament having a real final say on the Brexit deal when it comes through in a few months' time. Now, the central issue here is basically giving MPs a vote, and what's called a meaningful vote, and this would allow them to some extent to have a leverage over the government in terms of the negotiating position that comes through from the UK-EU negotiations. Now, this is important because what many people, or rather particularly Brexit MPs and Brexit politicians, Brexit commentators suspect, is that if MPs in Parliament were given a vote which the government had to follow in terms of the Brexit negotiations, it could mean that if the government decided to walk away with a no deal in the Brexit negotiations, Parliament could overrule the government and effectively stop them from doing that. And that's a very difficult negotiating position to be in, because obviously the government cannot then legitimately say in the negotiations, this isn't acceptable to us, we're going to walk away. It to some extent binds the government and indeed the UK into having to accept a deal at the end of the negotiations. Now, the reason why the success of the government was relatively successful when the withdrawal bill was back in the Commons this week was because Theresa May had a discussion with those MPs in her party, mainly Anna Soubry, Dominic Grieve, over this meaningful vote, and gave some kind of assurances and promises that there would be a vote, or MPs would be given some kind of meaningful vote when, at some point, when the legislation was coming back into the Commons, and indeed when the negotiations were concluded. However, well, I should say actually, Dominic Grieve and Anna Soubry very much thought that they had been promised basically what they asked for in an amendment which Dominic Grieve had proposed to the withdrawal bill. The government amendment, though, has been published, and it basically says under a no-deal scenario, Parliament would vote on a motion in neutral terms. Now, what that really means, again, is a bit ambiguous, but it certainly doesn't mean, for many MPs who wanted a meaningful vote, it doesn't mean a meaningful vote in the sense of binding, very, very clear that the MPs will have, to a certain extent, the final say. And it's that's really the crucial point, and that's where the argument is going to be, and certainly probably going on to next week as well. The amendments, what the government's amendments they've put forward to the withdrawal bill, are going to be back in the Lords on Monday, and that's important because what's really going to happen is the whole thing's going to reset again, because the Lords are likely to vote back to the Commons the amendments that they put in the first place, so it's going to be ping-ponging between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and then the Commons are going to vote again on these kind of amendments on Wednesday as well. So you're going to have this vote come back to the Commons, where you're going to have the MPs and the same arguments happening again, and the question is whether the government has enough support, or has won enough support from their own ranks to basically win the argument here. Now, the fact that they've effectively not agreed or not backed down over this meaningful vote really indicates that perhaps they do believe they have the support from sort of teetering on the edge MPs, that they are going to fundamentally back the government when push comes to shove. But certainly a very interesting time, and certainly you can see here the internal problems going on with the government and the backbench MPs over Brexit. So again, next week, the withdrawal bill is back on the agenda and certainly going to be making headlines again. Next story up is what's happening to the Lib Dems. And they've done extraordinarily, or rather surprisingly well, in the Lewisham East election. Lib Dems are up 20 percentage points, so to a decent second place. Now, this is important because it's a massively pro-Remain part of London. Now, Labour's majority was slashed to some extent, and the Tories also lost ground. Lib Dems doing well. If you have a look at the actual results, Labour still very, very dominant. This is an ultra-safe Labour seat, 50.2%, down 17.7 percentage points though, so really significant. Lib Dems up 20.2 to 24%, and Conservatives down 8.6 percentage points to 14% as well. Now, Labour's Janet Dabby was elected the MP. There's no surprises there. Pretty much everyone expected a Labour MP was going to get in. But for an ultra-safe Labour seat, ultra-Remain seat as well, Lib Dems perhaps having a Brexit effect here. The whole Lib Dem strategy has basically been, we will be the party of to some extent remain, or at least the most hostile to Brexit party, and then the hope will attract some of that 48%. Perhaps in these kind of seats, they are starting to get through as the Conservative Party and indeed the Labour Party start to have to show their cards in terms of what they're doing in terms of the Brexit position they are taking. So interesting stuff, no doubt. We'll be making some reports again today. And finally, a report from the official spending watchdog, the National Audit Office, is making some headlines today because they've released a report saying that the government's universal credit system, which was introduced really to try and cut down and get people back into work and allow benefits to be a support structure to allow people back into employment fundamentally, but support those who need it, has basically concluded that there is zero evidence that this flagship reform gets people back to work or saves any money for the government in terms of benefit spending. Now, it's costing, according to the report, 4 times as much than originally planned to set up. It might be more expensive, in fact, than administering the current system in place, or the system which is in place before. And in terms of the history as well, you've got to think of universal credit. It's not great. Cost around £2 billion to set up, reportedly. No fewer than 6 years behind schedule due to IT problems and this and that. It's not yet nationwide. 8 million people are supposed to be claiming it by 2023. Currently, it's 850,000. So you can see a massive difference there, massive increase needed in order to reach that target by 2023. The Department of Work and Pensions, in response to this report, obviously, as the official spending watchdog, it carries some real clout. And it is a very, very firm report in its conclusions, really panning the whole welfare reform agenda, which has been introduced by the Conservative Party, or really championed by the Conservatives whilst in government. Department for Work and Pensions saying that the £2 billion spent on the universal credit will mean a return of investment of £34 billion over the next 10 years, and claiming it will help 200,000 people back to work. But no doubt, again, some more lines on this as Westminster wakes up round about now. That's pretty much it for today, and indeed this week you're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic rest of your Friday. See you again Monday, around about 9 o'clock.